The honourable member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Carbon tax Carney's Canadian comeback fueled a fiscal feud for this furious finance minister. The Prime Minister forced the finance minister to crash through the $40 billion deficit guardrail promise. The PBO says it'll be at least over $6 billion. Now that the Prime Minister is done using her, he'll dump her for carbon tax Carney. Will the Prime Minister confirm once he fires his finance minister, the deficit won't be a penny over $46 billion?
Good question.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While that member practices on things that rhyme with F words, our minister actually renegotiated NAFTA with Trump. Our minister introduced supports during a global pandemic to keep businesses and people going. Our minister tomorrow will see a GST tax breaks for Canadians. So while Conservatives practice their rhymes, we're delivering real supports for Canadians.
The honourable member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Their minister is the reason why Canada's economy is crapping out. And just to take dimes off of Doritos, they'll crash the deficit guardrail, taking Canada's finances off a cliff. The Prime Minister forced the Finance Minister to implement it. The PBO confirmed that they're already $6 billion past that fiscal guardrail. Canadians want to know how bad carbon tax Carney and the Prime Minister will smash through the $40 billion deficit guardrail. How bad is it? What is the deficit number?
Yeah, what is it?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, it's pretty clear that when the Conservatives have no real argument or debate, they just insult people. Because on this side of the House, our finance minister has a record of helping people in some of the hardest times that this country has ever faced. A global pandemic, global inflation. We saw another interest rate cut just this week, and tomorrow we will see more tax breaks for Canadians. Something Conservatives promised they'd do, but weren't able to. So what is it, Mr. Speaker? Is it the fact that it's our plan we're actually implementing, or they can't stand it's a woman doing it?
The honourable member for Northumberland, Peter. Order. Order. We made it into 12 questions before we really got too much noise here. Not bad, not bad. This is a record, I'm sure. This must be a record. The honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Consensus among economists, experts, and even the parliamentary budget officers is that this government has exceeded all of its fiscal anchors. The only question is, how badly have they failed? Can the government confirm whether the Minister of Finance has gone way past the guardrails, or whether they've gone completely off the cliff with a $46 billion deficit?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing.
The member should expand beyond the Fraser Institute, Mr. Speaker, and look to, for example, what the International Monetary Fund has said, what other lead financial authorities have said in the business press and elsewhere, the parliamentary budget officer as well. Canada has a very sustainable fiscal situation, the lowest debt in the G7, the lowest deficit in the G7, a AAA credit rating, Mr. Speaker. And what do we see on the Conservative side? A plan to make cuts, including a plan to cut $10 million for housing in Peterborough, his community, Mr. Speaker. What do you have to say to that?
The honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Well, let's return to the facts here. The current and former Governor of Bank of Canada, Tiff Macklin, and Steve Pelosi agree the Canadian economy is in big trouble. The phantom finance minister's economic plan is failing Canadians. The sad part is these Liberals don't even know how badly. So can someone go behind the curtain on the other side and simply ask carbon tax Carney what the deficit is?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing.
Mr. Speaker, I know this member is an honourable member, and I know that he cares about his community. A few weeks ago, I spoke with Peterborough's Mayor Jeff Leal, a good man, someone who cares about his community and is doing a great job in that city. I told him about the government's plan to invest over $10 million through the Housing Accelerator Fund to build more housing. The Conservatives want to cut that investment, among others. Will he join the other Conservative MPs who are advocating for the Accelerator Fund to ensure that more homes get built? I hope that he does, Mr. Speaker. The Mayor is asking.
The Honourable Member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes Brock.
Speaker, the Prime Minister has lost control of his spending and his cabinet. The PBO says that this year's budget deficit could be as high as $46 billion, smashing the $40 billion guardrail promised by the Finance Minister. And like so many ministers before her, this Finance Minister's time might be limited simply for standing up to the Prime Minister and his radical agenda. Will the Prime Minister confirm that he is ignoring his Prime Minister's $40 billion guardrail promise and tell us if the deficit will exceed $46 billion?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Throughout today, Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives have launched personal attacks on the Finance Minister, who's responsible for, among other things, the Canada Child Benefit, who's responsible for, among other things, ensuring that childcare is a priority in this country, moving towards $10 a day. What has that done in this country for its economy? Among other things, 110,000 women have been able to re-enter the workforce because childcare has now moved to an affordable level. They want to cancel that, Mr. Speaker. They say all these things about families. In the end, they don't care about families, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock.
Speaker, from that answer, it's clear that the Liberals have abandoned all hope of keeping their $40 billion guardrail promise that was made to Canadians. While the unelected, unaccountable and phantom Finance Minister, carbon tax Carney, pulls the strings from the shadows, the Liberals are following their Prime Minister and the economy of Canada right off the fiscal cliff. Already, interest charges on our debt will cost taxpayers more than the Fed send to the provinces in healthcare. So will the Prime Minister confirm that the deficit will not be over $46 billion?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, you know, there's some really good news. Last night, the Senate of Canada passed the legislation that's going to give a GST tax break starting tomorrow for all Canadians in all regions of the country, Mr. Speaker. That is actually good news. That is something in which the Conservatives campaigned on, but oops, they actually voted against it, Mr. Speaker. They're the Grinch of Christmas, Mr. Speaker, whereas we are giving a tax break during the holiday season. That is good news.